A business acquaintance of Mr. Thompson here in Muncie said that you would be one of my most interesting people ever interviewed.
Well, that's a kind of billing that how do you live up to it?
You are noted for being very outgoing and very frank and outspoken in your views. We'd like to talk to you about economic matters, of course, of which you're very knowledgeable. The presidential race, which is very important at this point, which brings to mind one question. Has Forbes Magazine, either during your ownership or your father's, ever endorsed a Democratic president?
Gee, that's a good question. I doubt it. I would have to confess now that I'm no longer an active Republican that behind the secrecy of the booth, I have split my ticket on innumerable occasions. But when you are a candidate, and I used to be in the state Senate in New Jersey and was a Republican candidate for governor there, you kind of can't seek the party's machinery and then play sour grapes on the results of it. So while I was active in politics, I never announced my split tickets, but since emancipation from the political ambition, it's easier to be candid. Yes, I have voted for Democratic candidates on occasion.
Do you feel that Gerald Ford will emerge as a real power in the current primary race?
Well, I think what you're up against is a very tough time element. If Mr. Reagan, as in the next few days will do in the South, rolls up at least all the delegates in 4 states, if he comes into Illinois and does as well as some of the polls would indicate he will, he's going to go into the convention with nearly enough delegates, and that creates a bandwagon psychology. Mr. Ford would have to literally become a candidate in the next 2 to 3 weeks. By then, Bush doesn't feel knocked out. Certainly, Mr. Anderson feels far from knocked out, and after what happened in Massachusetts and Vermont, Baker feels that eventually, as happened to Bush and happened to Anderson, his virtues will eventually emerge, and he has some. The problem is you have 3 people, and Connolly to a degree, splitting the spectrum of the Republican Party that isn't hardcore, decade-long, ardently in support of Mr. Reagan. And that's tough because you got to remember Mr. Reagan nearly got the nomination over an incumbent President Ford in the last go-around. And his hardcore hasn't that much diminished. So I think his nomination is right now likely, and that it's getting to a position where for Mr. Ford to block him, it's too late almost, because you have nobody withdrawing and saying, okay, we've all tried, we've knocked each other out, now fellas, Reagan wouldn't be the right man, let's all get in the back of Jerry. That isn't the way the scenario is being written these days, so I think the diverse and determination of those who don't share Mr. Reagan's views are so split among themselves that Mr. Reagan, it looks like, is going to walk away with it. But everything that's looked so positive, the only hope I see is one who doesn't feel Mr. Reagan would be a good, effective candidate in November, is that everything that seemed so clear 6 months ago was totally different 4 months ago. Everything that was so clear a month ago is again up in the air. So out of all this uncertainty, we know there'll be 2 nominees, and the likelihood at the moment is Carter and Reagan.
One question, I'd like an economic forecast. We have a high prime rate. We have spiraling inflation, 18%. What's going to happen in the next few months, the next 12 months?
I think we're in what you might call a rolling readjustment. I don't see an a recession of sharpness or long duration, because we will have new billions from the so-called oil surplus taxes directed at additional spending toward new energy sources. We must have and crank up defense preparation. I think that what you see is obvious recession, as we've talked about, in automobiles. You see it in construction. You see it in the lines and things dependent on those things. But that is going to shift around to where there are new jobs and great new areas of demand, so that I can't see the recession being something that's out of hand. If you're out of the job, for you it's a depression. But the guy that gets a new job making tanks at the Chrysler plant, he doesn't care if he's not making Chrysler New Yorkers. He's employed and well paid.